I'm Tim Houlihan. I'm the provost here at St. Francis. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to Constitution Day. I don't have to say much because all I have to really do is introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Miriam Salholtz, professor in the Department of Accounting and Business Law and the moderator of the St. Thomas More Pre-Law Society. Every year we have to do a program. It's a federal mandate to do a program on the Constitution. It's actually been a great opportunity to explore a lot of different issues. Also, almost every year it sneaks up on me much faster than expected. And I called Professor Salholtz at the last moment, and she remarkably pulled this together. I'd like to thank the two students, Natasha and Alexander. And without further ado, I introduce Professor Salholtz.
Thank you very much. The first thing I want to do before we get into the program honoring our Constitution by contrasting it with that of other countries is to introduce a very important person, Catherine Canido, who is the past immediate president of the St. Thomas More Pre-Law Society and is nonetheless prepared an amazing program for this year. So Catherine, I want to just tell everybody a little bit more about Catherine. She has been a member of the honors program. We have very wonderful, very smart students in this school. She is no slouch. She is a double major in history and political science with a minor in English. And Catherine is planning to go to law school, which is, from my point of view, not going to be too difficult because she scored on the LSAT an unbelievable 178 out of 180. So I think that, yes, I think that law schools will be very happy to have you. But first, tell us a little bit about the activities of the club.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salholtz. Let me begin by sharing with all of you the mission and goals of the St. Thomas More Pre-Law Society and its planned events for the fall 2012 semester. The St. Thomas More Pre-Law Society provides prospective law students with the opportunity to fellowship with other prospective law students, as one example of networking. As the meetings progress, organized events such as panels, informal discussion groups, and luncheons allow members the additional opportunity to network with legal professionals. Networking with the club affords members the benefit from everything from advice on course selection, preparation for law school, guidance on the law school application process, to insight on applying to law internships and how to prepare for the interview process. To aid in achieving this, we invite professors who are teaching law-related courses for the upcoming semester to present their courses to the members and mingle during a luncheon. Senior members and office holders share their experiences with the law school admission process and with job and internship opportunities. In addition, as an incentive, we planned an informal discussion with several current law school students in which one from every year come and answer the members' questions, called A Day in the Life of a Law Student, in which the members get to see what a day in the life of a law student of every year is like. The club also collaborates with career services to have experienced speakers come in and advise the students on legal resume writing and interview procedures. We also plan visits to law schools such as Brooklyn Law School, and in the past, Dr. Salholtz, the moderator, has organized a visit to Fordham Law School in which she's very, very graciously given students the opportunity to sit in on one of her classes. We will hold mini debates about world events in between mock trial practice, LSAT preparation, and guest speakers. The annual mock trial affords members the opportunity to practice their litigation skills among their peers and in front of a real judge. This semester, the Pre-Law Society will be making additional excursions to a seminar about young lawyers, an event called In Practice with Michael McNamara, and also attend an event called In Chambers with Honorable Judge Richard J. Sullivan, where members will get to see litigation through the eyes of professionals. Students are fully immersed in the legal realm, whether in attending events or meetings, or while in the office of the moderator, Dr. Salholtz, who remains a mentor to members by role-playing their crisis or situation as senior executive to junior associates. The executives, members, and moderator work together to bring the multitude of facets of the legal profession to the limelight, from mega firms to solo practice, from in-house counsel to prosecutor, from policy advocate to public defender. And as a result, this semester's goals are to continue to do that through the events just recently stated. Thank you, and please enjoy the prepared presentation for Constitution Day.
Thank you, Catherine. I should also add, Catherine is one of the bravest people I know, so she's done a remarkable job. I will introduce the two speakers, and then I'm going to make a few comments about the Constitution. I think that's the right order. Or maybe I'll introduce our two speakers in the order that they're going to be speaking. Our first speaker is Alexander Yakovlevich, who is a sophomore, right? And a member of the honors program, a member of our illustrious water polo team, and of the Organization of Serbian Students Abroad. Also no slouch, he's a double major in management and economics and a minor in political science. Our second speaker, Natasha Edwards, is a junior, and she is the incoming president of the Pre-Law Society, also a member of the honors program, and a member of the women's tennis team, a peer counselor at the campus ministry, a double major in psychology and international cultural studies with a concentration in international business and a minor in business. And she is planning, after doing all that, to combine law school and a doctoral program in psychology after graduation. Alexander is not planning to be a lawyer. I think he's planning to be president of Serbia or something. I'm not quite sure. But we'll see. We'll keep track. So I thought, and I don't want to take too much time because I want you to hear the students. They've worked incredibly hard on their presentations, and they're really interesting because what do we know about the constitutions of Serbia and China? Not too much. So, and you know so much about the U.S. Constitution, so I thought I would give you some quotations of what other people have said about the Constitution. And I like this one a lot because it's literary, even though the person is someone I may not like so much, Alex E. Jones. His quotation is, "The answer to 1984 is 1776. Get that? Yes, 1984, totalitarianism. Our Constitution is our best protection against totalitarianism. Benjamin Franklin said, well, the U.S. Constitution doesn't guarantee happiness, only the pursuit of it. You have to catch up with it yourself. The next quote, you have to figure out who made this quote. I don't know if you're going to get this. I don't think you're going to get this. In the blood heat of pursuing the enemy, many people are forgetting what we are fighting for. We are fighting for our hard-won liberty and freedom, for our Constitution and the due processes of our law, and the right to differ in ideas, religion, and politics. Anybody have any idea who said that? The answer, did you?
George Washington?
That would be a wonderful, wonderful guess. No, the answer is Julia Child. You know, the cook? She said that. She wrote this book, My Life in France, and she's American, so I thought that was kind of interesting that she would come up with something like that. What else I want to tell you about the flexibility? We have a constitution that's very flexible, and our students will comment on the flexibility of their constitutions. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, the United States Constitution has proved itself the most marvelously, he would say, elastic compilation of rules of government ever written. Abraham Lincoln said, don't interfere with anything in the Constitution. That must be maintained, for it is the only safeguard of our liberties. What and whom does the Constitution protect? And I know I'm doing this with my students in business law when we were looking at some cases, Snyder versus Phelps. And sometimes the Constitution, which is such a wonderful document, gives rights to people that we really maybe wish they didn't have them, but nonetheless they have them. And there was two statements. One is Oliver Wendell Holmes, who was on the Supreme Court some years ago. If there is any principle of the Constitution that more imperatively calls for attachment than any other, it is the principle of free thought. Not free thought for those who agree with us, but freedom for the thought that we hate. That's a very important part of our U.S. Constitution. And it was said more succinctly by the late beloved Senator Edward Kennedy, the Constitution does not just protect those whose views we share, it also protects those with whose views we disagree. And John Marshall, the greatest Supreme Court justice ever, said, the Constitution is colorblind and neither knows nor tolerates classes among citizens. Next, foreign comments, because we're doing comparative. So I said, well, what do people in other countries say about the Constitution? And they weren't necessarily talking about our Constitution, but talking about constitutions. So Thomas Macaulay, British, said, a good constitution is infinitely better than the best despot. And William Blackstone, also British, said that the king can do no wrong is a necessary and fundamental principle of the English Constitution. I thought the next comment was interesting. If he said the king has these rights because of the Constitution, the next quote was, the British Constitution has always been puzzling and always will be. And it was Queen Elizabeth II who came out with that. So I thought that was very good. And finally, not to be outdone, there was Napoleon Bonaparte. And he said a constitution should be short and obscure. Maybe he was thinking about himself, right? So that was Napoleon Bonaparte. He wasn't so obscure, right? Finally, what about U.S. politicians? I just have a couple here, because there's so many good ones. What do U.S. politicians say about our Constitution? Are any of you old enough to remember Dan Quayle? Remember Dan Quayle? He came out with rather brilliant bits of wisdom. We shouldn't have to be burdened with all the technicalities that come up from time to time with shrewd, smart lawyers interpreting what the laws or what the Constitution may or may not say. The problem is that's judicial review, and that's what happens. And Sarah Palin said, we say, keep your change, we'll keep our God, our guns, and our Constitution. But finally, the politician's statement that I like best is George Washington, right? And he said, and I agree, the Constitution is the guide which I will never abandon. It is our guide. It is our law. It is very precious to us, and so we are honoring our Constitution today by hearing from these two marvelous students a bit about two other constitutions. So first we have Alexander, about the Constitution of the Republic of Serbia.
Okay, first of all, before I start, I would just like to thank the St. Thomas More Pre-Law Society, St. Francis College for making this event possible, and Professor Salholz for inviting me to this great event. First of all, I would like to introduce myself. Thank you for the marvelous introduction. My name is Alexander Jakovljević. I am from Serbia, the country I'm going to talk about, and sophomore, my third semester here, member of the water polo team, and a double major in economics and business management. First of all, before I even start talking about Serbia, I just want to give some background information because Serbia is not a huge country like the United States and China that is in the news every day, and so people know a lot about. Serbia is a country located in the southeast part of Europe, known as the Balkan Peninsula. It is relatively small. It is just a bit bigger than the state of Maine, and has a population of 7.5 million people, which is less than New York City. Even though it is relatively small in size and population, it is located in the crossroads, as you can see, between east and west, and therefore it had a very turbulent, violent, and deadly history. The proof of my statement is that during my lifetime alone, so in the last 20 years, Serbia has changed its name 4 times while reshaping its territory 2 times. So United States hasn't changed the name for 236 years, and the latest territorial expansion was in Hawaii, added Hawaii as a state following the World War II. So that is how brutal and how interesting in a way our history was. Serbian people are people of Slavic origin, meaning as they came, as well as Russians, Ukrainians, they came from that area, from the Ural, and settled in this area of the Balkans around 7th century AD. From that period, they lived under the patronage of the Byzantine Empire, or the so-called Eastern Roman Empire. First time we gained our independence was in the 13th century, only to lose it 2 centuries after. But during that time period, the highest representatives of the Serbian Orthodox Church did start to think about some set of rules, how to codify the country, and so they did have some rules that had both civil and religious provisions, and that were making the country of Serbia, as it was called today, more modern, had a set of rules, so it wasn't barbaric like other countries in the region were. But in the aftermath of the Battle of Kosovo that occurred in 1389, Serbia has lost its independence, its nation, and its entire legal heritage, only to regain it almost 5 centuries later. So 500 years, Serbia was under other countries' rule. And when it did regain its independence in 1804, the political elite was thinking how to catch up, how to make some new rules, some new legal system that will govern the country. But at the time, it was irrational to look back in her own legal heritage because it was already 450, 500 years outdated. So they did look in the countries like the United States and France that were pioneering at that period in the legal way to look as a role models. And a kingdom at the time, Serbia was increasingly looking toward the West, and that what at the end led to the creation of first Serbian constitution in 1835. It was envisioned primarily based on the French and Belgian constitutions at the time, but also it did have Montesquieu's idea of separation of powers that is also incorporated in the US Constitution. So it is very hard to say it was directly taken from the US Constitution or any other, because those were general ideas that are still present today. Almost every constitution, modern Western constitution, has it. From that point until the present day, Serbia has changed 11 constitutions, while the US has kept the one they had from 1787. Latest one, adopted in the referendum in October 2006, had in mind to sever all ties that were previous with the socialist and communist era that we're reliving in the last 50 or 60 years. So since after World War II until 2000, we have lived in a system based on Marxist-Leninist vision of society rather than the one the Western society was based upon. And by entering this period of transition, we had to adapt all levels of our government to this new reality and this new way of living that we are trying to create right now. So the Serbian constitution, as well as the all continental European constitutions, were written in a civil law tradition. And it is also, as well as most European countries, a unitary country. I mean, there are no lower level governments. It has 209 articles, and it is divided into 10 sections. Also, it has a preamble that is specifically addressing the biggest current Serbian problem, which is the problem of its region of Kosovo. And after it has fallen under the UN Protectorate in 1999, it was felt that Kosovo, with the help of the large Western powers, is pushing slowly itself towards independence. And in order to stop these attempts and prevent any further Serbian government to recognize the existence of such a country, the preamble states, I will read directly from the Constitution, province of Kosovo is an integral part of the territory of Serbia, and that from such status the province of Kosovo follow constitutional obligations of all state bodies to uphold and protect the state interests of Serbia in Kosovo in all internal and foreign political relations. So, but now the concern is if the Serbia will ever be able to fulfill such a provision, because from 2008 till today, around 90 countries of the world have recognized the unilateral declaration of independence by the provisional institutions of Kosovo, and which I have to mention is a complete breach of all international law, United Nations Charter, and United Nations Security Council resolutions that guarantee the territorial sovereignty and integrity of Serbia at that territory and in every United Nations member state that has territories that have such issues. But even though this issue has caused problems in Serbia in terms of the EU integration and further transition to a more capitalistic, more democratic system, we have still embraced legal traditions of the EU and the EU countries, and we're closely cooperated with them in the process of writing the Constitution. And the first section, as I mentioned, was the section called the Constitutional Principles, which lays down the basic principles of what is the country we want to live in. And the first article, Article 1, says, Republic of Serbia is a state of Serbian people and all of its citizens who live in it based on the rule of law and social justice, human and minority rights and freedoms, and commitment to European principles and values. Also, Article 4, it says that government system shall be based on the division of power into legislative, executive, and judiciary branch, and that the relation between these branches of power shall be based on balance and mutual control. So this is practically the same as it says in the US Constitution about the separation of powers and checks and balance system. Even though I have to mention that most of the modern countries do have such a provisions, I think this was directly taken from the US Constitution, incorporated into our system of living. When I'm talking about the branches of government, there is a huge difference between how our branches work and how the US government works. First of all, Serbia is a parliamentary system, country of a parliamentary system, meaning that while in the US you directly elect the executive branch, meaning the president, in Serbia he is elected, appointed through the parliament, not the president but the prime minister. That's why the legislative branch is considered to be the most powerful branch, because it has the most powers in control and rule of the country. It consists of one chamber, 250 members of the parliament, or they're called deputies in Serbia, but to make it easier, we'll call it as they call it in Britain, members of the parliament, MPs. And their main role is same as in the US, is to pass the bills and conduct oversight of the executive branch. That is done through the committees and subcommittees, so same as in the US Congress, while every bill has to be passed by a simple majority, but the difference is that the bill can be proposed by absolutely anyone. So any citizen, government, institution, you name it, whoever wants to propose a bill, he can do it. Other very important and interesting thing is the way how we elect those members of the parliament. While in the US you have a direct representation, meaning that you directly elect your members, your congressmen, and your senators, in Serbia, its system is very different because it is based on proportional system, meaning that you vote for a political party that later brings the members of the parliament into the National Assembly. It's a national popular vote, so based on the percentages that the political party wins, on some mathematical formula, they are assigned the numbers of seats in the legislature. Also, it has never happened so far that a single political party has had such a popularity and that it has won 50% or more votes. Therefore, every government, every executive branch has to reflect on the fact that there will be coalitions that will govern the country in the period of 4 years, for how long our national parliament exists, and then it has to be re-voted, re-elected. Currently, there are 3 major parties that consist of a majority. They have elected their own president of the National Assembly, which is pretty similar to the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, if I'm not mistaken. And the same majority is reflected to the government, as we call the executive branch in Serbia. It is consisted of a prime minister, same as in UK, has their ministers, 17 ministries today, but the number is changing rapidly, depends from when government changes, the number of ministers change as well. And they have the full executive authority that they have in the US, proposing the bill, conducting fiscal policy, institutions, making agencies, making all sorts of policies they think is required. But also what Serbia has, and I think people in the US will find it very fascinating, is that it has an office of a president as well. Even though it has a very symbolic role, not as well as the British Queen, but similarly, he is elected on a 5-year term by the people on a national popular vote system. His authority, probably the biggest power is that he has the power of veto, which the US president has here as well. Also, he is a commander-in-chief of the armed forces. He can grant paroles and awards, and he is representing Serbia abroad as well as Minister of Foreign Affairs. One power that executive branch in the US has and Serbia doesn't, it is nominating the judges to the courts. As I said, it's a unitary system of government, so there is only one level of government, and there's only one level of courts, so there are no state courts, only federal, we call it national courts. But the role of nominating the judges is given to an institution called the High Judicial Council, which is a group of 15 people that nominate judges for service. They are elected, firstly, for a 3-year term, so not as in U.S. life and good behavior. They are elected for a 3-year term, and after that, those 3 years, if they are re-elected, they serve for life. For life with good behavior, of course, there is a process of impeachment of those judges. As I said, there is only one level of courts, so there is a trial court like the Federal District Court, there is an appellate court similar to the U.S. Court of Appeals, and there is a Supreme Court, which in Serbia does not have the role as it has here, because it is just the highest appellate court, and it makes final decisions on some cases that can go up to that level. For all the issues of constitutionality between the laws and between the jurisdictions of the governments, the branches of governments, there is a constitutional court based on the French model of a constitutional court, which resolves all issues that have to do with a law that is passed and that is unconstitutional. But the Constitutional Court does not have the power to interpret the Constitution. Because it has 209 articles, it is specifically and very detailedly listed what can and what cannot be done. The Constitutional Court can only say if this law is in accordance with the Constitution. If it is not, it can line item veto like it has in the US, but the court can just delete parts of the Constitution or declare entire of the law, and declare entire law unconstitutional. And therefore, it has to be returned to the national parliament for change, or it cannot be valid at all anymore. One issue that the US Supreme Court was doing mostly in the 60s, but throughout today's date, is the issue of human and minority rights and freedoms, or as you call it here, rights and liberties. In Serbia, that job was given to the writers of the Constitution because, as I said in the sections 1, it's talking about the basic principle. Section 2 was given to the human rights and freedoms, while the organization of government I was just talking about was given part in section 5. So that, I think, is the most obvious influence of the United States and the Western powers, because today they put a large emphasis on human rights and rights of the minorities, and therefore we have placed it as a number 2 as our priority for explaining how it works. Human rights are written in approximately 70 articles. So it states specifically every single article. Of course, the basic stuff as freedom of speech, as we call freedom of expression, freedom of media, freedom of association, freedom of petition, freedom of assembly. But what I find very interesting is that Article 21 says, everyone shall have the right to equal legal protection without discrimination. And later it says what types of discriminations are prohibited. All direct or indirect discrimination based on race, sex, national origin, social origin, birth, religion, political or other opinion, culture, language, age, mental or physical disability shall be prohibited. I don't know if anyone noticed, but sexual orientation is nowhere mentioned here. Also, in the further articles, it mentions that the marriage is a union between man and a woman. And by saying so, it enables ever to have any kind of talk about gay marriages because they're unconstitutional at the beginning. Here in the US Supreme Court will say if the gay couples have the right to marry, but in Serbia it will never come to the Constitutional Court because it says specifically that it is unconstitutional. Also, Article 24 says there shall be no death penalty in the Republic of Serbia, even though there still is in the United States, but EU countries, and that is one of the EU standards, is that there shall be no death penalty. Human cloning is prohibited as well. Right to a legal person, it reminds me a lot about Sixth Amendment and the case of Gideon versus Wainwright, where it said that people have the right of counsel even though they don't have the means to pay for that counsel. Also, I want to read some interesting articles, is inviolability of home, our Fifth Amendment, privacy. So there shall be, as it says, entering a person's home shall be allowed only with a court order. It also is, I would say, a legacy of the US Constitution that it gave such rules and such provisions. As I said, freedom of thought, freedom of conscience and religion. Free exercise clause from the First Amendment was also incorporated. It says everyone shall have the right to freedom to manifest their religion or religious beliefs in worship, observance, practice, and teaching. Freedom of thought and expression, even though it is not absolute and it is limited in a way not through censorship or not allowing political ideas to come out, but for example, burning a flag is a major offense and it is subject to service in jail. Any type of offending of the national symbols as a country as a whole is considered to be illegal and a criminal act. Okay. Also, I think that is very interesting, it relates to Obamacare, as they call it, is a right to health care, right to strike, right to pension, and right to social protection. Those are very interesting things, and it is something that I would say Europe is very proud of, and the countries in the US still do not do it in a way that we think it is suitable for a Western modern country. But also I have to mention, and to finish, that Serbian constitution is not fully implemented. So the theory and practice are very far away one from each other, because there are cases, like it happened before, that a single political party controlled the office of the president, the prime minister, and a majority in the parliament, which led to a complete control of one political party of the complete system. Also, I just would like to end that, say that it is important to understand that the Serbian implementation of the constitution is similar to the implementation of the US Constitution at the late 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. What that implies is that in some cases, practices used seem to collide with the rules established by the Constitution. But at the time in the US, people did not enjoy the same rights and privileges that they do now, not because the Constitution has changed, we know it hasn't, but because awareness of implementing rules prescribed by the Constitution have changed. And a glimpse into US history gives me hope and reassures me that as the time progresses, Serbia will realize the full capacity of its laws and institutions in providing all of its citizens equal protection under the law and promoting social welfare and economic prosperity. Thank you.
That was wonderful. We learned so much. I'm going to ask if you have questions to hold them, because we're going to have our next speaker. If we have time, we'll take questions in here. If not, you'll have the opportunity to pose your questions to the speakers when you enjoy the Constitution cake out in the hallway afterwards. So our next speaker is Natasha Edwards. I introduced Natasha, and she's going to talk about China and its constitution. Thank you very much, Natasha.
I'd like to say good afternoon to all. First, I want to thank St. Francis College for giving me another opportunity to do something that I think is beyond my expectation for myself before. I never thought I would have been given this opportunity, and I'm very grateful for it. I thank Dr. Salos because as soon as she spoke to me about it, I told her I'm definitely in. Today I'm talking about the People's Republic of China. First, I start with a quote. Greek philosopher Plato once stated, "Laws are partially formed for the sake of good men, in order to instruct them how they may live on friendly terms with one another, and partly for the sake of those who refuse to be instructed, whose spirit cannot be subdued or softened or hindered from plunging into evil." A very compelling basis to why many constitutions were formed. Today, I stand briefly to discuss the People's Republic of China, mainly known as China Constitution. The People's Republic of China was founded on the 1st of October 1949. Days before the founding of the new China, the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference adopted a common program which served as a temporary constitution. 5 years later, in September 1954, the first constitution was declared. It fixed the people's democracy along with the socialist principle, giving the basic state and social systems and the rights and obligations of the citizens. Although successfully implemented, it almost collapsed after 3 years. In the 9th year of the Cultural Revolution, which had drawn the whole nation into an economic and social disturbance and created complete political disorder, in 1975, an inadequately drafted constitution was implemented. This constitution was also short-lived, and the country's third constitution was adopted in 1978 to restore order after such an extreme chaos. However, to the People's Republic of China's disappointment, the new constitution could not facilitate the country's progress, and a drastic revision was needed. A constitutional reform committee was created, and it took them 2 years and 3 months to draft a new constitution, along with a 4-month-long civil debate. The committee revised roughly 100 items in the draft, which led to the adoption and presentation of what China considers their first version of a constitution on December 4th, 1982. This leads me to the current constitution of the People's Republic of China. The current constitution of the People's Republic of China is an amended version to the one enacted on December 4th, 1982. Since the present constitution was adopted in 1982, it has been amended 4 times, most recently on March 14, 2004. 2, thoroughly discussed all the amendments. I will not only take this hour, but I would have to kindly ask you all to stay for 2 extra hours. So I will just briefly sift through certain amendments and deliver them to you. The first amendment was approved on April 12, 1988. This amendment made changes to general principles on private economy and ownership of land. It involved inclusion of a new paragraph clarifying the rights given to private sector by the state in relation to economy and the law on buying, selling, and distributing of land. A simple amendment if you look at what the country has been through previously. The second amendment is when more changes became present. This amendment was approved on March 29, 1993. The People's Republic of China was now about to put their personal stamp on their constitution, with many of the articles being altered either by adding or removing words and paragraphs, I rediscovered the beauty of words. The choice and use of words can add sovereignty or facilitate concern. Adding spiritual and culture to any sentence on a political platform can stir compassion and intimacy with others. China did that. 6 years later, the Third Amendment was made, March 15, 1999, showing its citizens the intolerability of the law. The People's Republic of China made it clear that any criminal activities against state would be severely punished. Finally, the Fourth and Final Amendment was approved on March 14, 2004. This has been their greatest amendment to this version. 12 articles, the preamble, and the chapter title underwent adjustments towards the new era. The Fourth Amendment was the laying down of the foundation towards an age of rights. One, if not the most important and prominent revision, was the insertion of the sentence, "The state respects and preserves human rights." Article 33. With human rights being such a controversial topic in the People's Republic of China, this declaration was debated on whether China was becoming acceptable towards universal rights and not just seen Asian or Chinese, or if this was just a play on words, removing rights of citizens to human rights. It is still, however, not quite decided, as either choice has evidence to support their claim. Within the vast Chinese constitution, which consists of 113 articles, it is divided into 5 sections: the preamble, chapter 1, which is the general principles, chapter 2, the fundamental rights and duties of citizens, chapter 3, the structure of the state, and chapter 4, the flag, the national emblem, and the capital. Considering the length of each selection, although possible, time would not permit me. And as such, I would only give a synopsis of each, starting with the preamble. Just as the one within the United States, except for the length that is, it is a brief statement on the purpose of the governing body. And I quote from the People's Republic of China's Constitution. The People's Republic of China is a unitary, multinational state built up jointly by the people of all its nationalities. Socialist relations of equality, unity, and mutual assistance have been established among them and will continue to be strengthened in the struggle to safeguard the unity of the nationalities. It is necessary to combat big nations, chauvinism, mainly Han chauvinism, and also necessary to combat local national chauvinism. The state does its utmost to promote the common prosperity of all nationalities in the country. This constitution affirms the achievement of the struggles of the Chinese people of all nationalities and defines the basic system and basic tasks of the state in legal form. The Constitution goes on further, listing the general principles. It discusses various standards and main beliefs in relation to topics like education, medicine and fitness, foreign investment, and family planning. These principles indicate the predetermined policies and forms of action in regards to these areas. The People's Republic of China Constitution further entitles the fundamental rights and duties of citizens. It records various rights, freedoms, and duties afforded to citizens of this country. Duty to defend motherland, equal rights for women, right to petition the state, freedom of speech, press, assembly, and voting requirements are just a few. But I asked, what good would a constitution be if it didn't have rights listed? But what good is an institution if the rights aren't practiced? As I go on further, I enter the densest portion of the People's Republic of China Constitution, Chapter 3, the structure of the state. This chapter is broken into 7 sections. In relation to the National People's Congress, the President of the People's Republic of China, the State Council, the People's Court, and others. The National People's Congress, also known as the NPC, is the highest organ of state power. It has a permanent body, the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress. The NPC, along with the committee, exercise the legislative power of the state. The National People's Congress has various powers and functions, such as they elect the president and the vice president. They supervise the enforcement of the Constitution, decide on the choice of the premier, and elect the president of the Supreme People's Court. With the election of these persons to office, they also have the power to remove them from office. The executive branch is the State Council, that is the Central People's Government of the People's Republic of China. This body is the highest organ of state administration. Their tasks include, but are not limited to, submitting proposals to the National People's Congress or its standing committee. The third branch, which is the judiciary, is similar to that of the United States, as it consists of People's Court from the Supreme Court to the military and other special People's Court. Lastly, Chapter 4, the national flag, the national emblem, and the capital entitled specifically what the chapter states. The flag, which is red with 5 stars, the emblem, the capital, these make up the final articles of the Constitution. As we heard from Alexander, there's a constitutional court for Serbia. I consider that a means for change because society constantly changes. There's always a need for change. Change is completely evident within our society. I am sure if I ask anyone to stand and say St. Francis College is still the same as it was 10 years ago, no one can say it is. Not even the halls are the same. Aristotle once stated, even when laws have been written down, they ought not always to remain unaltered. And as such, I wondered, as within the United States, there's a judicial review whereby the court has the power to review constitutionality of a statute, although, yes, sometimes limited, the possibility exists. And as such, I wonder if that also exists within the People's Republic of China. Change is everywhere. So how does the Constitution in China go through review? Within the People's Republic of China, amendments to the Constitution are to be proposed by the Standing Committee of the National People's Congress, or by more than 1/5 of the deputies of the National People's Congress, and adopted by a vote of more than 2/3 of all the deputies in this Congress. It's one of the powers of the NPC to amend the Constitution. However ironically that sounds, the committee who makes the amendments is chosen by the NPC, and they're the ones who also interpret the Constitution. Makes you wonder, is there a separation of powers? Because the NPC and the committee, the NPC are the ones who chooses the committee. So if the committee is going to amend, then the NPC basically has complete power. I stand here, and there is so much to discuss about China's constitution, but I chose 2 areas to project interest: freedom of speech and family planning. As mentioned prior in the general principles and the fundamental rights and duties of citizens within the People's Republic of China, the law states, and I quote, "Citizens of the People's Republic of China enjoy freedom of speech, of the press, of assembly, of association, of possession, and of demonstration. The law states this, but it is only written and far from practiced. For many years, there have been a debate about this article being present in the China's constitution, when there are so many restrictions that media outlets face when too much is said. The article promises the right to freedom of speech, of press, of assembly, but has it just been pretty words on expensive paper? For example, one thing about the Constitution is it prohibits anyone from doing anything contrary to the state's interests, which sadly includes disputing or having unsupportive reactions. Therefore, if you do not support the state, then you would be pulled from whatever you are saying is that freedom of speech. This, however, there was, however, a brief moment when many believed the situation might be changing.
I'm sorry to wrap up in the next minute or two. Maybe summarizes it for you.
Sorry. Yes, there was a brief moment when many thought this situation was being changed. But sadly, it has not. Yes, many who are against the Chinese constitution are not being jailed, but they are suffering many penalties in regards to going against what is said by the Chinese government. Finally, my issue of family planning. The constitution states that it promotes family planning so that population growth may fit the plans for the economic and social development. With a population of 1.3 billion, how is this one-child policy benefiting one of the world's top players? Family planning has been promoted as one of the basic state policies in China. The government formulates policies and legislation for controlling population growth by improving the population quality. They provide various services like contraception. The citizens, they claim, voluntarily accept. This became food for thought. After my research, a few questions were still left unanswered. And today I ask you all, is this where the world is heading in regards to countries' constitution? Will the world take pattern from China and implement a family planning article due to the economic situation we are facing globally? Is a family planning policy necessary and of any advantage to China's society? Would China, due to the strong ties it has with the United States, think it's time for another reform? For 8 years has passed by. Personally, are any of us completely free? Free to speak, free to broadcast, free to be human beings. Nothing is perfect, but true beauty is often hidden deep within imperfection. The true beauty of society is our laws, because they aren't perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Alexander.